Test.
The Working Group on Women in the 21st Century Workforce will come to order. The Working Group is holding its first official meeting today to take an in-depth look at the challenges that women face in the workforce. I'll now recognize myself for an opening statement. Generations of women have persevered and fought for this country to afford equal rights to all citizens, regardless of sex. Women have made great strides and achieved so much in this country, but the fact remains that so many women and girls still face barriers to achieving their full potential. It's been illegal for employers to discriminate based on sex since the enactment of the Equal Pay Act in 1963. However, recent Labor Department statistics show that when comparing median salaries for all jobs, women still make less overall than men. When this is multiplied across a full career, it makes it even more difficult for women to save for things like home ownership or retirement. There are many factors responsible for this gap, including entering lower paying career fields, leaving the workforce to care for children or parents, challenges with childcare, and discrimination. And its damaging effects don't just harm women, but families, communities, and retirement security. 4 out of 10 women are the sole income earners for their families. And when they earn less, there's less to spend on things like groceries, school supplies, and health care for children or dependent parents. Studies show that in Arizona, which I represent, where over 500,000 women live in poverty, only 1 in 5 of the most common jobs worked by women provide economic self-sufficiency. Nationally, women are also vastly underrepresented in leadership positions. Women hold only 17% of board seats in Fortune 500 companies, make up only 7% of top ranks in the military, something I know a little bit about, 25% of computer and mathematical scientists, 13% of engineers, and only 20% of Congress. Expanding opportunity for women, whether it's in the workforce, the military, the government, or elsewhere, won't just make a difference for them, but all Americans. That's why I'm working hard with my teammates here to address the barriers that hold women back and help empower the next generation of female leaders. As part of this effort, over recent weeks, I've met with women in Southern Arizona who are leaders in business, nonprofits, public services, and more to hear about the barriers they've encountered. I've heard firsthand how women are still facing challenges such as pay disparities, getting passed over for much-deserved promotions, and the unrealistic expectations that we have from society on them. Many women today are struggling to balance the competing demands from their workplace and their families. They are expected to do it all, and quite frankly, they're exhausted. As if these demands are not enough, many of these women have encountered real biases and discrimination. It makes it even harder to succeed. Whether bias or discrimination are found, we must make every appropriate effort to identify and eliminate it. This includes instances where biases and discrimination may be unintentional or unconscious. The solution to these issues may not always lie in an act of Congress, however, but we must have a duty to discuss the issues issues and raise awareness in our role as a platform. This issue, by the way, is personal to me. I've been fighting for equality for women my entire life. I became a pilot even though they said I couldn't. And in the military, I challenged policies that were unfair to women, and I'm continuing those efforts here in Congress. In the nearly 100 years since women earned the right to vote, we've come far, but I think we have a long ways to go. Our country is founded on the principles that we pick the best man for the job. Let me say that again. Our country is founded on the principle that we pick the best man for the job, even if she's a woman. It's time we made that idea a reality, and we still have a lot of work to do. With that, I want to welcome our witnesses, and I look forward to their testimony. Before I do that, I want to now recognize the chairman of the Republican Policy Committee, the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Messer, for any opening statement he may have.
Thank you, Martha. Thanks for your leadership on this issue. This is an exciting day for the Republican Policy Committee. As the chairwoman mentioned, this is our first hearing for the working group on women in the 21st century workforce. You know, I was raised by a single working mom who raised my brother and I while working at the factory. I am married to a working mom, my wife, who balances her career as a lawyer with raising our kids every day. And I'm the father of two future working women who now are hardworking students but will soon be in the workforce. And as a son and a husband and a father, I'm concerned about the challenges that women face in the workforce today. So I want to thank Congresswoman McSally for her leadership on this issue, her dogged determination, and for recognizing that these challenges are real. You know, as the chairwoman mentioned, 2/3 of minimum wage workers are women, and women are 80% more likely to men than live in poverty at 65. And at the same time, 4 in 10 American families look to women as their sole breadwinners. I lived that in my life. Beyond pay, there are other workforce issues creating challenges for women in the workplace. Stagnant wages, lack of good job options, little or no workforce flexibility, high child care prices, and the list goes on. As conservatives, we should champion opportunity for women in the workplace. But more regulation and one-size-fits-all government programs are not the answer. Our goal today is to listen to working women about their needs, learn from the experts and innovators that we have testifying, and then advance policy ideas that provide more opportunities for women, not fewer, and empower women, not restrict their options in the workplace. I look forward to the valuable insight our panelists will provide today, and I'm excited to have the gavel handed over to the chairwoman as we continue this hearing. Thank you for being here, and let's get to work.
All right, thank you, Mr. Messer. I want to thank the vice chairs of our working group as well. We've got Mr. Katko, Corbello, Comstock, Poliquin, Kaufman, and Wahlberg, who are all vice chairs. And I want to provide the opportunity for each of the vice chairs that are present now to give an opening statement as well. So the chair now recognizes Mr. Kaufman from Colorado.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I want to thank Congresswoman McSally for chairing this important working group for women in the 21st century workforce, and thanks in advance to our panelists who will no doubt deliver valuable testimony today. We are here to examine critical issues facing working women today. In particular, we are looking for ways to expand opportunities, increase workplace flexibility, remove barriers to employment, and empower the next generation of young women. These are good goals for reform across our entire workforce, but women in particular have faced historical barriers that men have not. While women have made important strides in education and in our workforce, there is still more work to be done. We are here because we believe we can continue to improve opportunities for women with the business community as a key partner. We want to be part of the solution. So it is critical that we understand the particular challenges and potential solutions for working women today. Thank you, Madam Chairman. I yield back.
Great, thanks. The chair now recognizes Mr. Corbello from Florida.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I am here to listen and to learn today, but I did want to thank Martha McSally for her leadership in bringing us all together for this initiative and for this hearing today. And I want to thank her on behalf of two little girls, Sylvia and Carolina. Those are my two little girls, ages 6 and 4. I want them to have all the opportunities that anyone could ask for in the world. And also, I want to thank Ms. McSally on behalf of my wife, who's returning to the workforce this year as a part-time teacher at a high school in back home. So this is a wonderful opportunity for us to learn and for us to figure out how we can empower women and make sure that there are no obstacles that the government is putting in their way so that they can achieve their full potential. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Absolutely. The chair now recognizes Mr. Poliquin from Maine.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Chair, and I really appreciate all the work you've done to put this group together. And I'm honored to serve as one of your vice chairs, and I want to thank all those who are going to testify today. This is really, really important stuff, and we need to hear from the folks who are most affected by these issues. And I look forward to asking you some questions and have you educate us so we can help you and your families live better, more productive, and happier lives. There are so many studies that show that a happy mom, a happy adult with a close relationship to her kids is very, very important to fuel our economy and also to make sure our kids grow up happy and healthy and they themselves live better and wonderful lives. I'm a single parent myself. My son is now 25, Sam. I'm really close to Sammy. When he was still in diapers, my wife died, and so I raised him as a single parent, and I'll tell you, I know what it's like to make sure that Sammy gets his homework done and make sure that he has dinner, make sure he takes a bath, make sure he brushes his teeth, and then after he goes to bed to do the peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and then you get an hour off to put your feet up, and then you do it all over again for the next day. So I get it. It's the greatest job in the world, but it's tough. It's tough to be a mom, a single parent, a mom or dad, and have a very demanding full-time job. I know what it's like, and I'm really interested in digging into some of these issues because I'll tell you, the last thing single parents need when they're caring for kids or aging parents or disabled parents is have to worry about getting paid the same amount as a man for the same amount of work. That's just not fair. And so I'm looking at that issue in particular, and also the flexibility in the workplace, how important that is for moms to go on. But in any event, thank you very much, Chairman. I really appreciate it, and thank you for being here to testify.
Great, thanks. The chair now recognizes Ms. Stefanik from New York for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairwoman McSally. I'm so excited to participate in this policy committee hearing to launch this working group. I'm the freshman elected representative to the policy committee and am excited to support our dynamic chairperson here, Martha McSally, who has truly cracked glass ceilings in her own way, in her own career before coming to Congress. I think you're going to find that you have some of the hardest working innovative members who are participating in this working group. And one of the interests that I have is that the demographics of our workforce have changed. I think many of the flexibility in the workplace issues are different for different generations. I am a millennial, on the older side of millennials, but I think we've seen increased economic opportunity for our next generation workforce when it comes to barriers being broken for women. But I also want to ensure that we're touching on economic opportunity for all women. There are a few statistics that are of concern to me. The majority of healthcare decisions that are made in American households today are made by women, whether it's for their spouse, whether it's for their elderly parents, or whether it's for their young children. As we've seen an increase in healthcare costs, those burdens frequently rest on women's shoulders. sectors. Another concern I have is if you look at poverty, we have a historic number of women who are reliant upon food stamps that has exploded over the past 8 years. I want to dig into that issue. On the positive side, the majority of our college graduates today are women. That has been a shift over the past few decades, and I'd love to talk about educational opportunities. So thanks for the chance to be here. I'm excited to dig into these issues.
All right, thank you. We're pleased to have a very distinguished panel before us today on this important topic. First is Ms. Romina Baccia. Did I say that correct? Baccia is the Deputy Director of the Heritage Foundation's Rowe Institute for Economic Policy Studies and the Grover H. Herman Research Fellow in Federal Budgetary Affairs, where she focuses on the economy, government spending, and the national debt. Prior to joining Heritage in 2011, Ms. Baccia was a policy analyst at the Independent Women's Forum. We have Ms. Samantha Tassone, is president of Growth Fuel, where she focuses on gender intelligence, how to perform under pressure, and advancing women's leadership. Ms. Tassone has more than 20 years of experience working public, private, and nonprofit organizations and individuals to accelerate their performance. Ms. T. Van Hook serves as the Chief Executive Officer of Habitat for Humanity, Tucson, where she is continuing her vast experience facilitating community and government collaborative projects for low-income populations. Ms. Van Hook has spent more than 20 years working in community-based human services, neighborhood housing, and public transit programs. Welcome from Tucson. And Mr. Andrew Biggs is a resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute, where he studies Social Security reform, state and local government pensions, and public sector pay and benefits. Prior to joining AEI, Mr. Biggs was the Principal Deputy Commissioner of the Social Security Administration and was previously the Associate Director of the White House National Economic Council, working on Social Security reform. I want to say thanks again to everybody for being here today and for your flexibility. We had a bit of schedule gymnastics going around in order to make this happen for the other schedule issues today on the floor, and so we appreciate your flexibility to all be here at this time period. So the chair is now recognizing Ms. Baccia for 5 minutes.
Distinguished members of the Republican Policy Committee and Working Group on Women in the 21st Century Workforce, Chairwoman McSally, thank you for inviting me to testify today. I'm Romina Baccia, Deputy Director and Grover M. Herman Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation. The views I express in this testimony are my own and should not be construed as representing any official position of the Heritage Foundation. As women have become an increasingly powerful economic and political force, lawmakers and researchers have dedicated much time to comparing women's economic opportunities and outcomes to those of men. Are women who have historically suffered from discrimination continuing to suffer similar injustices today? It's an important question, and I commend the committee for considering it. President Obama's White House and countless organizations have repeatedly claimed that women face widespread discrimination in the U.S. on the basis of their gender. The consequences of this supposed discrimination are said to appear in terms of pay and are reflected in the gender wage gap, according to which women earn only 70 cents for every dollar that men earn. Taking a closer look at this wage gap, however, and how it's calculated, shows that it really is a meaningless statistic that doesn't tell us much of anything about gender discrimination in the workplace. It merely compares the median earnings of women and men who work full-time. However, several factors affect how much individuals are paid that are not reflected in this wage gap. When including such relevant factors such as education, choice of industry, occupation, hours worked, experience, and career interruptions, the difference between average male and female wages shrinks to 93 to 97%. Moreover, when comparing single childless women with single childless men, ages 35 to 43, we find that there is a wage premium. Women in this group earned wages that exceeded those of their male counterparts by 8%. Women have not only caught up to men in many professional endeavors, young women are outperforming their male counterparts. Women also already earn more college degrees than men do. While we find no female to male wage gap when men and women first begin their professional careers, something happens that decreases women's earnings relative to those of men as they age, and especially as they have children. As it turns out, many women have different preferences than trying to match men's earnings. Polling results by the Pew Research Center reveal that mothers and fathers have indeed very different preferences when it comes to their ideal work environment. Particularly telling is the emphasis that women place on a flexible work schedule. According to Pew, 70% of working women value a flexible schedule, with only 48% of men saying the same. Meanwhile, working fathers were 10 percentage points more likely to value a high-paying job than women were. If working fathers choose more high-paying jobs and working mothers choose jobs that allow them more flexibility in exchange for lower pay, we should expect a natural divergence in earnings. Rather than being the result of discrimination against women, this is largely the result of different revealed preferences by men and women. I'm quoting June and Dave O'Neill now, open quote, "What the average woman sacrifices in earnings from choosing jobs that allow for part-time work and flexible work is presumably offset by a gain in the utility of time spent with children and family," close quote. Women should be allowed to make these choices without their employers being punished for supposed discrimination. Neither should Congress single out women for preferential treatment due to family and caregiving roles that many women assume. Proposed policies like the Paycheck Fairness Act or a new mandatory paid leave entitlement promise to do more harm than good. The rigid pay structures encouraged by the Paycheck Fairness Act would likely take away flexible work arrangements, reducing the availability of a highly valuable benefit to working mothers. A new mandatory paid leave benefit is likely to worsen statistical discrimination affecting women, as employers can safely assume that women of childbearing age are much more likely to use such benefits than men are. And a Cornell study from 2015 shows that women hired after the enactment of the 1993 Family Medical Leave Act were 8% less likely to be promoted. Congress should be focused on establishing the legal conditions that allow free markets to flourish and enabling greater economic growth by reducing regulatory barriers, lowering taxes, and eliminating barriers to entry that undermine competition. A growing economy benefits all Americans, including women. Public policies targeting women's work experience with mandated benefits or excessive liability for supposed discrimination are limiting rather than expanding women's economic opportunities. Such policies should be eliminated. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Baccia. The chair now recognizes Ms. Tassone for 5 minutes.
I want to thank Representative McSally for inviting me here. I am honored and thrilled to support this important agenda. We live in a society of ubiquitous and persistent gender stereotypes. We believe that if everyone else is biased, we don't need to worry about ourselves or censoring ourselves. The solution isn't just to point out our stereotypes. Instead, we need to additionally communicate that these biases are undesirable, unacceptable, and identify how to effectively manage and shut them down. Because these biases are perpetuating two things: an expiring and out-of-date socio-culture environment in the U.S. I interviewed my network to prepare for today, professional women at all levels. I asked the question, what challenges uniquely impact women in corporate America? And to my surprise, what I found out, in common in all of these interviews, was that not one woman said, I am being discriminated against, I am being held back, I am not being treated fairly, or I deserve X and give it to me. They did not say that. Instead, they said, you know what? It's not the obvious things that are holding me back. Instead, they talked about this uneven playing field in corporate America. They astutely recognized intentional bias, mostly subtle, but they were able to link it to these real impacts called relationships, trust, and personal advancement. They were especially, and they're especially compounded over time. Research points out that women are 3 times more likely than men to say that they've missed out on an assignment or promotion or raise due to gender. Research also supports that women who have indicated they are less consulted on important decisions. I clearly see the challenges that working women face organized into 4 categories. The first being that too many women are not employed at all in the workforce, and they struggle with obstacles of reentry from childcare and elder care. These women are falling behind due to these long absences from the workforce. The second component or category would be that too many women are underemployed, and they address reentry by taking lower paid jobs and lower skilled jobs. Some settle for part-time work, while others take the path needing more flexible schedules. The third one would be that women are in the workforce today, but their voices and their opinions are not heard, so their skills are not effectively deployed. And the fourth category is other women who are in the workforce with potential to grow in responsibility and earnings, but they have no roadmap for career advancement, they have no sponsor to advocate for them, they have no real credible coach in their corner to help them develop skills or maneuver through culture or politics in their organizations. These women are spinning their wheels, but they're capable of so much more. When asked the question, what challenges uniquely impact women in corporate America, I believe that if we do not address and create awareness for 21st century gender intelligence, we will never be able to move the needle forward around gender diversity, much less gender parity, or even overcoming these gender stereotypes, all of which limit the opportunity for women and deprives organizations of valuable talent. Research by McKinsey Institute finds that there is $12 trillion to be added to global GDP by 2025, advancing women's equality. This report calls this critical economic challenge which must be addressed. Creating systemic change for a sustainable socio-culture environment in the U.S. economy for which both men and women can subscribe to must start with gender intelligence, a concept born in the 1990s by Barbara Annis. At its core, gender intelligence is about creating understanding and appreciation for naturally occurring characteristics that distinguish both men and women, beyond the obvious biological design differences, beyond cultural differences, and beyond the neurological differences between the genders, to include gender-related attitudes and behaviors distinct to the genders. This includes an understanding of male-related energy versus female-related energy, which drives our behavior. Gender intelligence is not derived by achieving a quota, ignoring or tolerating these gender differences, or becoming less authentic to ourselves in order to succeed. Today, more than ever, there's a tangible business case for gender intelligence and economic benefits to be gained by all. The research proves that there is significant ROI for having a balance of women at the top of organizations where strategic decisions are made in the C-suite and at the board level. What we have found through research is that higher returns on equity are gained, profitability goes up, revenue goes up, turnover goes down, and engagement levels go up when there is a balance of women sitting at the top of organizations, and as little as 30%. The newly found understanding about women and ROI impacts is catching on, and many are listening. For women, this is not only about being at the party, but also being able to dance as a respected member. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tassone. The chair now recognizes Ms. Van Hook for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you for having me here. It's exciting to be invited for their first meeting of the committee. I'm T. Van Hook, CEO of Habitat for Humanity Tucson, and it's an honor to testify on behalf of my colleagues across the country and many of the partnering home buyers across the country, many of whom are low-income women and families. Driven by the belief that housing provides a critical foundation for breaking the cycle of poverty, Habitat for Humanity has grown from a grassroots effort that started on a farm in southern Georgia in 1976 to a global nonprofit housing organization in nearly 1,400 communities across the U.S. and in 70 countries. Habitat Tucson is one of the first Habitat affiliates in the United States, and over the last 36 years, we've helped more than 600 low-income families with solutions. More than 60% of the households we have helped are single-family female heads of household. Housing is key to economic issues for women. Women occupy nearly half of the formal workforce and take on at least half, if not more, of the unpaid work in homes. They are contributing to the national economy while serving as the primary caregivers of their families, in many cases sandwiched between generations, running between jobs, juggling responsibilities, and balancing family budgets on a shoestring. For these women, stable housing is the foundation that makes them able to break the cycle of poverty. In addition, the baby boom generation is aging. Older women are facing growing housing needs because they are outliving their male spouses and partners, and they will need a lot of assistance as they age in place. Unfortunately, safe, decent, affordable housing is not a reality for many families, and the vast majority of Americans believe housing affordability is a problem. Nearly two-thirds think the United States is still in the midst of a housing crisis, and yet the worst is yet to come. Since Habitat Tucson was established in 1980, our affiliate has seen affordability of housing decrease, and the problem is getting worse. In Tucson, apartment rents are significantly higher than a minimum wage job can support. For two adults making minimum wage, a modest 700-square-foot apartment is out of reach. Two bedrooms far exceeds 30% of their income. Unfortunately, after subtracting taxes and an employee's portion of employer-sponsored health insurance, mandatory retirements, and other workplace deductions, low-income workers can't fill the gap between apartment rents and the affordable housing. Low-income wages are driving people backwards. According to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, the median cost of a new home in this country has jumped from $76,700 in July of 1980 to $355,800 in July of 2016. While wages have gone at a much slower rate, even under Habitat's model of 0% interest, if a low-income worker were to pay their entire salary towards a mortgage, they would have to pay twice as long in 2016 as they did in 1980. That's a phenomenal jump. They could not afford to buy a home. A good example of the key challenges facing working women in need of affordable housing is Brenda, a mother of 5 who was selected to be Habitat Tucson's 2016 Women's Build Home Buyer. After losing her husband in an accident, Brenda and her family moved into the house in June of last year. After completing her required sweat equity and homeowner classes, Brenda and her family were excited to have a safe, healthy place to live after moving out of a cramped 2-room apartment. Brenda is forced to go to her job at 1:45 every morning, so she's able to get home from work and take care of the kids after school. Her older children get the younger children ready and off to school every morning. She's unable to afford her childcare in the afternoons, so she's forced to take a low-paying job to have the flexibility to be home after school with her children. That's just one of the issues today's women face in the workforce. We've made great strides with educated women, but low-wage workers are still facing critical problems in attaining affordable housing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Hook. The chair now recognizes Mr. Biggs for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman McSally and members of the committee. In the area of employment policy, it is much easier to do harm than to do good. By and large, U.S. labor markets are considered to be more efficient than those of other countries. Compensation paid to employees is roughly in line with those employees' productivity, and the division of compensation between wages and different types of fringe benefits roughly reflects employees' preferences. Thus, when elected officials consider policies to alter the workings of the labor market, they should carefully consider the unintended consequences of those changes that could make things worse for women rather than better. With regard to women in the labor market, I wish to focus on 2 core points. First, the differences in average salaries between men and women largely reflect differences in the factors that rationally affect pay, not overt pay discrimination by employers. And second, the changes to benefits or other policies that affect working women do not come without costs. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, in 2014, the median woman working full-time received a salary 17% below that of a similar male. For many, this implies a 17% pay gap driven by gender discrimination that public policy should seek to erase. But these sorts of figures, as Ms. Bacchia pointed out earlier, fail to account for a number of important factors. For instance, men work more dangerous jobs than women. Men, on average, are 13 times more likely to be killed on the job than women are. Men work longer hours than women, even among full-time employees. Men have more years of work experience. Men's jobs have higher financial risk with greater fluctuations in salaries from year to year. Men receive lower average fringe benefits benefits than women, and in college, men choose to focus on majors that are more lucrative in the labor market. These are not issues of fairness, but they are factors that, as Ms. Bacchia pointed out earlier, when studies account for these different variations, they find little or no space for overt pay discrimination by employers. This does not imply at all that pay discrimination doesn't take place, but it gives some idea of the role of pay discrimination versus other factors which affect pay between men and women. From here, I'd like to shift into thinking about the consequences of public policy. First, in thinking about the gender wage gap, some have advocated making it easier for women to sue their employers over pay discrimination. While this seems to be an attractive solution, it has the downside, though, of making women less attractive to men, or less attractive to employers than male employees would be, making women appear to be a liability risk as we make it easier to sue by shifting the burden of proof to employers, by raising the pay awards. That's a risk that a female employee would carry with her that a male employee would not, and employers may take that into account when choosing who to hire. The result is that this could backfire against women by making them less attractive as employers or as employees. Second, while regulation often fails, the free market tends to punish employers who discriminate and reward employers who base their pay upon productivity. Some of you may have seen a video on YouTube just in the past week or so where the actress Kristen Bell had a spoof advertisement for an employment company that would supply businesses with women that the business could then pay less. This was their advertisement as a supposed employment firm. The reality, though, going back to the Nobel Prize-winning economist Gary Becker, is that if women were truly paid much less than men for the same work, businesses could earn windfall profits by offering a slightly higher pay to attract women. Businesses who operate on very tight profit margins should only choose to employ women. The fact that we don't see that happening tells us there's something else going on in the labor market. Recent research by sociologist Devah Pager of Harvard University examined employers and divvied out the employers' willingness to discriminate. This was based on discrimination by race, but they sent employers identical resumes where the only thing that differed in the resumes was the race of the individual. And they found some employers would call back more white respondents, more white applicants than they would black ones. But then they revisited those firms 6 years later and found that the firms that discriminated were twice as likely to have gone bankrupt in that period than those that didn't. The point here, and there's other research showing that deregulation of banking and financial markets, startup firms, they tend to pay women more equally, that the competitive market tends to focus on productivity, not on discrimination, so I think that's something we need to focus on. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Mr. Biggs. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for, actually, sorry, before I do that, we had another vice chair show up, so I want to recognize Ms. Comstock from Virginia for a few minutes for opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and really appreciate the opportunity to be here and look forward to addressing the many sort of complex and diverse issues that we have here on women in the workplace and making sure they have all the opportunities and advantages. And so I appreciate you having this hearing today and look forward to continuing.
Great, thank you, Ms. Comstock. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. I appreciate the testimony, very diverse views from different backgrounds from our panel. I will say in this journey that we're intending to take with this working group, we intend it to be multi-month and multi-year if necessary. And in this first phase, we're trying to make sure we first understand in our platform role that we can identify what the real challenges and barriers are for women and girls meeting their full potential. I don't want to fast forward and predetermine the outcome of what solutions we may be offering, and then of those solutions, some of them may take an act of Congress, but many of them probably do not. So I just wanted to make sure everybody understood sort of where we are on the map of the journey that we are taking. Our intent here is to be listening, raising awareness, and in this first phase, identifying correctly what we think those challenges and barriers are, not making an assumption that they're all federal policy or federal legislation related. And so in this in this space. I will say, I will give you my Martha McSally nirvana. Again, I'm the person who grew up in a family where I was told I could be anything I wanted to be, and there were no restrictions on me as a girl. And it wasn't until I joined the military that I discovered that that was not true. That it was actually against the law for me to be a fighter pilot simply because I had ovaries. And I didn't want to be a fighter pilot, but that, quite frankly, made me angry, and I decided for that very reason that I was going to be a fighter pilot in order to prove them wrong. And I have been, myself in my own journey, dealing with some of these overt and very subtle biases my entire life. And for those individuals that I've talked to in our community, those women I've talked to in our community, the reality is that there still feels like there are a number of things many have been talked about here today that are still not allowing women to achieve their full potential. My utopia, for women and girls in our country, is that they could achieve their full economic potential, whatever that is for them, so that they could take care of them and their families, that fathers would be involved as much as mothers in the raising of children and caretaker responsibilities, and that sons, quite frankly, would also be as involved as much as daughters in the caretaking of our parents. Again, not saying that there's an act of Congress to address that, but if that's the case, and if then that is addressed culturally by employers and others, that we're all in this together, and we all have equal roles in these regards. My sense is, on this listening tour I've been on, some of these things I think would balance themselves out. So what I know, and many of you have mentioned it, is, look, side by side, all full-time jobs, it's depending on how you calculate it. Latest Department of Labor says 81 cents on the dollar, somewhere between 79 to 81 cents on the dollar, all full-time jobs, all men, all women. As we've taken a deep dive into this, from about 81 to about 95 are some of the factors that have been raised here today, that women are going into lower-paying career fields for a variety of different reasons. We still need to understand that better. That women are choosing or desiring or needing flexibility more than men as they go in and out of the workforce because of these caregiver roles. And I will say, one of my frustrations, honestly, is that we often hear people, on our side of the aisle talk about these are all women's choices. And that terminology, quite frankly, infuriates me a little bit, because if it's a woman's choice to take care of her child when the father went away, and she's now trying to care for her children and pay the bills and take care of her, that's actually a good choice to make. But let's make sure she has all the opportunity to move up the economic ladder, to achieve her potential, and take care of her children, right? So let's just make sure in our terminology that when we're looking at these choices, we're looking at them from a framework of identifying that some of these things are difficult choices that women have to make. So I guess the first question I would ask is, as we're addressing the issue of flexibility, this is one that's very important, flexibility in the workforce. What are the current barriers that we're seeing related to flexibility in the workforce that would be benefiting men and women? Millennials, we heard from Ms. Stefanik, are more desiring flexibility. What are the current barriers that we could maybe remove and the challenges related to flexibility? And I'll just kind of go down the row here, starting with our first witness.
Some of the challenges and barriers are due to occupations and industries, and there's been research recently that shows that there are certain occupations that are more conducive to having flexible work hours, where the individual performing the job, it doesn't really matter when the individual does the job, but a lot of higher paying positions, executive positions in particular, rely on having common business hours and being in a location together with other employees, staff, or clients that would apply to law, to executive positions. And so you see a differential there where not every job is conducive to having a very flexible arrangement. I would also like to emphasize that the 5 or 3% remaining wage gap that is unexplained by current data does not indicate that that is due to discrimination, that simply that we are unable to measure the other relevant factors accurately at the moment does not mean that therefore this is discrimination. For example, the current data does not very well reflect when women choose professions that provide more benefits, fringe benefits like Dr. Biggs talked about. It also does not currently reflect when you have interactions between experience and job tenure and occupation and industry. Those things act together. We don't currently measure them. To the extent that Labor Department policies are preventing flexible work arrangements for for example, requiring that employers pay overtime rather than allowing for comp time. Those are barriers that Congress could address to allow for more flexible work arrangements.
Okay, great. I talked too long, and now I'm out of time, so if the rest of you could keep thoughts on that, and we'll come to a second round, but I want to give the opportunity for my colleagues to ask questions. So the chair now recognizes Mr. Kaufman from Colorado for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Let's see, Mrs. Bacha, did I say it right?
Thank you.
You mentioned a 2009 study from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York that women who are gifted in math and science are more likely to pursue careers in law, medicine, and biology instead of careers in physical sciences and engineering. Would reaching these mathematically talented women and their families earlier to educate them about careers in the physical sciences and engineering, perhaps as early as elementary school, help them enter these careers in greater numbers?
It is possible. The women that were studied in...
Can you hit your microphone, please?
Thank you. The women that were studied reported that what was important to them in their choice of major was their perception of how much they would enjoy the work they would likely be doing after graduation, and also to please their parents. To the extent that parents have expectations that women that go into sciences go into different fields than men, that can pose a barrier to some women. To the extent that women have the perception that being a doctor, helping others, they will enjoy more than being an engineer, I'm not sure that we can do much about that other than making those fields more attractive to them.
Mr. Biggs, how is retirement financed differently for women than for men? Do pensions and 401ks make up a smaller portion of a woman's retirement income?
With retirement, there are two sides to it. On the one hand, women tend to have lower earnings, shorter working careers than men. Social Security has a progressive benefit formula. It also has a spousal benefit. So as a rate of return or a return on investment, women tend to get a substantially better deal from Social Security than they do than men do. On the other hand, though, women, because they're in and out of the workforce, often lower paid jobs don't offer a 401k. Certainly a traditional pension that demands a long, uninterrupted career does not work well for women. So on balance, I'm not convinced that women's retirement security is substantially poorer than men in the sense of being able to maintain their pre-retirement standard of living. But that's a balance of different factors that sometimes work for them, sometimes work against them.
Okay. Ms. Van Hook, how do women's housing challenges vary across the country? How are the challenges different for women in urban areas versus rural areas?
Madam Chair, Mr. Kaufman, we're finding through Habitat that the challenges vary in uses of land and land tenure. In urban areas, there are issues around the acquisition of land. We have areas throughout the country where people are essentially priced out of the market. I can talk a little bit about Arizona. We have some resort areas where low-income workers are bused into areas in Sedona, for example, where the affordable housing is an hour, 2 hours away, and we have buses that bring workers into the resorts so that the low-income housing, because the land prices are so high. I know in New York we're going to different models through Habitat so that we can have land tenure in those areas. Affordable housing across the country is run in different models in different areas, but when you have high land values, land trust models and other models have to be deployed in order to secure long-term affordability for those areas.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Toussaint, if I said that right. Toussaint. In your testimony, you discuss the business case for gender intelligence and the return on investment when there is a balance of women at the top of an organization. Will you please tell us, please elaborate on this? Is this something you see businesses recognizing? Is this catching on?
Oh, God, yes. It's interesting, just to share something, the more that I talk about this platform of gender intelligence at the executive level, I am more than likely to run into male executives who are saying, I get the value of women, and I've actually been invited when I return from here to host a male-only executive forum to teach male executives who own companies about gender intelligence and to educate them on the principles and the significance and the ROI. So there is growing interest in learning and understanding, and men recognizing that women have a lot more to offer, and recognizing that there are cultural systems inside their organizations that they know things are going on, but they don't know how they got there, and they don't know what to do about it. So the doors of this trend, 21st century leadership, 21st century knowledge about, what gender intelligence can bring to an organization, about promoting women and creating, really what it's about is creating a higher level of conversation and respect so that we can get to solve problems that are allowing for diversity of thought. And so we all win when that happens.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I yield back.
Okay, thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Corbello from Florida for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I've seen theories out there that one of the reasons that perhaps there is a gap in pay is that women aren't as likely to challenge their employers on compensation and salary and benefits as men are. And there's a bill that's been filed in this Congress by Ms. Jenkins. I'm a co-sponsor that allows employees to approach their employers with questions regarding compensation, even making, asking for comparisons without any penalty. Do any of you think that that is something that could perhaps empower women to challenge their employers, to initiate conversations about compensation and pay? I guess we'll start here and go from this side to the other end.
I think that overall it's a relatively harmless policy to the extent that it allows for more information and communication to happen between employers and their employees. I think it's a good policy. I do worry that it is one step in the direction of what we see in the Paycheck Fairness Act, where the Labor Department wants to collect data based on gender, how much individuals are earning. There, I worry more that in the long run, this will lead us down to the path of a comparative worth regime where the government will try to establish what are fair wages. But for employers and employees to have those conversations, I think, can be productive.
Thank you.
I'd like to say that I wholeheartedly disagree with making it a formalized policy and approaching trying to create equality through passing policy where it gives the employees a platform for which they feel they have the right. Employers are not against having the conversations. What's holding women back from my studies is not that it's confidence, right? Confidence to step into a conversation, confidence to feel that they have value, that they're a valuable contributor, and that they, they have the ability to have the competent skills to negotiate. So some of the skills that are lacking of why women are being held back in the workforce have to do with the lack of confidence that women have, the lack of skills, the negotiating skills. That, it's well researched that women are not as strong negotiators as men, and they lack that capability. And being able to, women are fearful that if they speak up and they advocate, that they're going to push the relationship too far, and that it's going to be negatively reflected back on them. And so I think...
Well, if I can interrupt you for a minute, my understanding is that there are employers out there that penalize any attempt to ask questions about salaries and make comparisons with other employees. This legislation would simply simply prohibit that kind of penalty. It does not force any type of conversation. The employer or the employer would have to take the initiative. So I just want to make sure that you understand what this bill does, and if you have any objections to that, if you could specifically address them.
So if I heard you correctly, what you were saying was that the bill allows the employee to ask for comparisons within a job family.
It prohibits any penalties to the employee for questioning the employer on compensation and even compensation relative to other people in the organization.
And would the employer be required to produce data or other salaries of comparable to that position?
The scope of the bill is fairly narrow. It prohibits penalties for asking these types of questions.
I don't see harm in that, but I think it just puts the spotlight on females in the workplace that we need to be treated differently.
Well, anyone can ask the question. It doesn't only apply to females. It doesn't allow the penalties against any employee for asking questions about.
Okay.
But I'm asking it in this context because, yes, there is that theory out there that women are more hesitant to engage employers on issues of compensation and benefits. And information is power. Perhaps having information at their disposal would give them more confidence or courage to engage in the conversation.
From that perspective, it could have some value, but it's obviously their choice as to whether or not they step into it and leverage it.
Right. Okay. Thank you. And I'm about to run out of time, so I'll yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Ms. Stefanik from New York for 5 minutes.
I have two, thank you. I have two broad questions. The first one is to ask if there are generational differences within the statistics, whether it's economic opportunity, wage inequality issues, housing inequality issues. And the reason I ask that is, I look at my mom's generation versus my generation, and there are clearly more economic opportunities for young women of today than there were for a generation ago. If you look at the millennial generation, we're the most educated, most diverse generation in this country's history. But we also have some interesting demographic trends. We're getting married later. We're having children later. There's a growing group of single professional women. So I'd love to go quickly down the line, starting with Ms. Baccia.
Yes, one clear difference is that women who were born before 1945 were taking more zero earnings years, meaning they took more time out of the workforce to raise children. On average, 18.7 years that they weren't working. And today, women born between 1946 and 1960 average a mere 3.7 years of zero earnings. So that gap is closing rapidly, and what this tells us is that we have many more working mothers in the workforce than was the case before, and this is why flexibility, the option of part-time work, all of these things are much more important now than they ever were before.
So 1960 for me seems like a long time ago. Do we have updated statistics, sort of 1960 to 1980, 1980 to today?
I don't have them at hand, but the Social Security Administration certainly has that data available, and I would assume that that gap has shrunk even further.
I'd be interested in that. Ms. Tasson.
I don't have any specific statistical data to contribute, sorry.
That's okay. Ms. Van Hook, on the housing issue?
We do. We have some statistics not based on age, but based on renter versus home ownership and security. Women who have rented homes throughout their lifetime and owned are far more at risk for financial and housing risk in later life than women who have owned a home. Although in later life, women who have not worked throughout their lifetime are at much higher risk for homelessness or at housing risk later in life as they age and run out of retirement savings, et cetera.
Mr. Biggs.
you have seen changes over time. I mean, even using the faulty numbers on the raw pay gap, which the latest figure shows 83%, that used to be 77%. It used to be a smaller number than that. That's part of a pattern of women having more work experience, which plays heavily into pay. You also have greater professional opportunities available to women today. When my mom was born, her two career choices were nurse or teacher. Now you have many, many more choices, and that allows women to higher paying occupations. So that is shrinking pay differences over time.
And my second broad question is, oftentimes we can look to the states for innovative policies to incentivize economic opportunity. Are there any programs or specific policies at the state level that have led to more economic opportunity for women to address these at a more localized approach?
I am very encouraged by recent efforts to reduce occupational licensing rules that allow more women to use their aptitude and skills to perform jobs that allow them to work from home or allow them to work out of the homes of others. Hair braiding is one example that has received great attention. I think this is particularly important for low-income women and single mothers.
From my perspective, with the changing demographics in the workforce and the way that work is actually being accomplished in the workforce over the last 10, 15 years, especially with technology, I think a focus on allowing independent contracting work and the ability to go out and find opportunities to apply your skills, whatever they might be, is a way to help women economically. I know in corporate America that the 1099 status is highly, there's a lot of legislation around what employers can do and who they can hire and what requirements have to be in place in order for them to hire outside contractors. And I think that that limits women's ability to be able to be agile and to meet their family needs, and it really points towards flexibility. So looking at a review of that would be helpful.
And I'm out of time. The chair now recognizes Ms. Brooks from Indiana for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I also want to thank Congresswoman McSally, our chair, for convening this important panel and for the staff and everyone who put this together. Building on Congresswoman Stefanik's question about innovation, I'd like to know whether or not any of you are familiar with any innovative practices in the private sector when it comes to closing the wage gap, because I think the best innovation, quite frankly, typically comes from the private sector. And it's good to see you again, Ms. Boccia. She was just in Indianapolis this past weekend where she was the moderator on a panel of a policy circle on women and economics. And so nice to see you again.
Nice to see you.
But I'd be curious if any of you know of any innovative practices in the private sector to close the wage gap within their own company, if you wouldn't mind starting.
What comes to mind for me right away is the growing sharing economy. I utilize Airbnb personally quite a bit. I am also an Airbnb host, and I have met very many single mothers who, having the ability to be able to rent out a room in their house that allows them to work part-time or to spend more time with their children, that is fantastic. That follows what my colleague spoke of, allowing individuals to pursue contracting opportunities. Same with Uber. There are very many women that do this today. When we're looking at the fact that women tend to outlive their husbands, they tend to live longer, but then they also tend to have lower income in retirement. You see very many baby boomers, and I work very closely with the AARP, who can confirm this as well, who are utilizing opportunities like Uber and Airbnb to make a living on their own terms and on their own time.
Thank you. We actually had a hearing at Energy and Commerce Manufacturing and Trade on sharing economy, and a woman came and gave an Uber driver and gave that exact testimony. So thank you for bringing that up. Ms. Van Hook?
Well, at Habitat, we are serving as a model, and we have several corporate partners where we have a mommy room, and we are encouraging our young employees to bring their children to work. We have several corporate partners that are bringing children to work in the workplace with workplace childcare. It encourages lower income workers to be able to bring the children to work, flex their time, telecommute. We're bringing our corporate partners that are sponsors of our program on board forward to do that. We're also initiating with several partners employer-assisted housing, where the employee and the employer enter into an agreement for down payment assistance, and they have shared equity in their homes. It allows employers and employees to have the employer has their employee invest in the community. They get a much more reliable employee that is invested in the community, stays, and really sees that the employer cares. They see longevity in their employee loyalty, and it's working out for several local businesses. It really builds community and gives them a much better employee.
I'm not familiar with that practice, but that really sounds fabulous. And is that something that really is in Tucson primarily getting started, or is that something that you've heard about in other parts of the country?
Well, we started doing it when I was an employee at the town of Moreno through municipal dollars, investing when the housing boom was in full swing and local municipal employees could not live in the town because housing prices were on the rise. It's a practice that we've brought to Habitat and we've brought to other businesses. It's a shared equity. If the house price goes up and the employee sells the house, you share in the gains, and if the house loses money, you share in the loss. But it's a great way to allow employees in an area with rising housing prices to be able to live in their community, and it's a great model.
Thank you for sharing that. Do either of the other panelists have any examples they'd like to share from the private? Yes, Mr.
I'll just quickly make 2 points. One, technology does make it easier to do things like telecommuting so that, women can remain professionally engaged even, at a time when they might need more time flexibility. I agree with the opportunities of things like the gig economy. I worry a little bit on the retirement end that as the number of people who are independent contractors increases, those folks are going to have to figure out some way to save for retirement on their own because they won't be eligible for a 401k through their employer or for health benefits, and that complicates it, so it's not an unbridled positive.
Thank you. And Ms. Tassone, thank you.
There's a movement for programs around sponsorship versus mentorship, and programs like this, there's research out there that shows, actually Harvard Business Review did an article on this, that women who get sponsored in corporations by either males or females, and the concept of a sponsor is when someone in a higher power position advocates for you and appoints you for promotions and helps care for your career, that these women who have had these sponsors have a 90% success rate in feeling that their career has advanced and moved along, where women who have not had sponsors are only 20% less likely to say that they have had career advancement and opportunities. So the concept of sponsorship and what that means and spreading the principles of that has significant value, and that women should step up for other women or men stepping up for other men and understanding what that means.
Thank you for sharing. I yield back.
The chair now recognizes Ms. Comstock from Virginia for 5 minutes.
Thank you. And actually, I'd like to continue on that point on sponsorship and sort of best practices, because I think, we all know, and I'm a big fan of the book Lean In, and when she talks, I think you referenced, Mr. Biggs, about the study that when you replace the women name with a male name, that people respond differently and think more highly of maybe the same qualifications when a male name is put there. Sheryl Sandberg also talks about how, women in those positions are called bossy or aren't listened to as much, or I think actually Carly Fiorina did a great commercial talking about how women are treated in the workplace when she said all the things that are said to women, she said back to men, and then it became kind of humorous. So I want to say, what would be, I started a young women's leadership program to put women in leadership positions in front of young girls in junior high and high school so they can start seeing and hearing the stories. And how can we, what are some of the best practices, and how can we get those in front of women, at the earliest stages so they understand some of the challenges and maybe some of the things that might hold them back and where they need to correct, whether it's taking risks, whether it's demanding, the same salaries that men are, and how we can find out information. And so I was interested in that sponsorship program, but what are some other best practices out there, whether it's starting your own business or getting that career path? Where in the private and public sector are there some other best practices like that?
I'll just touch quickly. The flattering way to put some of the points that you made about how women are characterized is that men and women have different leadership and work styles. And I think the increase in female-run, female-owned firms is helpful not just for the women running them, but also for employees, because they'll be working with somebody who has a more similar style to them. I think over time, the recognition of different styles improves, but it is so long as those different styles persist, it is going to be more difficult for women. If they're taking time out of the workforce, often the leadership of the firm where they work will tend to be male, and then you get those sorts of conflicts. So I agree with you on education, but I think having more female-owned firms is a step in the right direction.
You know, I know when I was at my law firm, we had a committee that would deal with these things. So since I was on the committee and a senior woman past, I'd already had my children, we would often step in and say, hey, we have a mom or a dad having a baby now. We would affirmatively kind of go to them and say, hey, is there going to be any different type of work style that you'd want, or we want to make sure you stay here. In some case, it could be a man or a woman. What can we do to make sure that your transition here into parenthood is going to, allow us to maintain and keep you? And I found it did help when I did it as somebody who was already in that senior position, could advocate for the others, that it did help. And so, I mean, I don't know if you see that in a lot of places, but oftentimes the men would then say, well, that's a great idea, glad you thought of that, but we needed to have somebody who would spur that conversation, and sometimes having it not be the person who was in the position of taking leave, because you're very afraid of that. I found my own daughter, when she went on leave, she was afraid, I don't want to ask things, I don't want to ask for special treatment, I don't want them to think because I'm a mom now that I'm not going to be as good. And I think we've got to dispel that idea from moms and dads, so that they think of this more as a transition period, but also a period where they still can be very productive employees.
I think that women in the workplace who find themselves in these positions are best able to begin this conversation and address these kinds of questions. If we think from a hiring perspective, an employer may want to be able to identify which women are more family-oriented, which ones are more job-oriented. Same as it comes to promotions, but all of these factors are protected. The employer is not allowed to ask what their family planning is for a particular female. However, if a woman has the impression that maybe she's being held back because there might be expectations that because she's of childbearing age, she may want to not have as much responsibility, may not be able to dedicate as much time to the work, the woman is in the best position due to legal restrictions to address this directly with her supervisor and others in management, to be able to create the kind of work environment that allows her to flourish, allows her to continue contributing to the company. And if she's not looking for more flexibility and is looking for more responsibility, I think the onus, again, unfortunately, falls on women in today's system to bring that to the table and openly lay their cards down and say what it is they want. And I've experienced this personally, and it comes down to confidence. Women have to have the confidence to ask for what they want. If you don't ask, you can't get what it is you want.
Definitely. From my perspective, going back to the concept of gender intelligence and all the research that's been done around gender intelligence, it has the knowledge about how men and women's brains function differently and are actually designed differently is a significantly attributes to how we behave differently. And the research will show that due to the design of women's brains, that men and women think differently. So women are more caretakers and known for caretaking. Women are more relationship-based and holistic thinkers and web thinkers, where the men's characteristics tend to be more around get it done and, fact-based and problem-solving and singular thinking. And so there's multiple different ways in which the brain is designed differently, and 1 out of every 5 people are hardwired more so like the opposite gender. And so that's where these statistics dynamics begin to make more sense and why women pick certain career fields that are nursing and, childcare, because we're designed that way, and that's where our comfort level comes in. But educating women that, the spatial, social and the science, where the spatial requirements come in, we're capable of it. It's just not something that we have access to or have understanding. And there's actually there was an interesting research that said young women in grade 5 this is where the men and women start distinguishing themselves around performance and capability, and it talked about women and the young girls getting A's in school, and they were on par with men, except with the males, except when the females went home, the parents would say, great job, good job, you've got it, and when the men went home and they didn't get the A's, but they were capable because the intelligence level was the same, the parents would say, you could do better, you're capable. And it has all to do with the way in which women, as they progress through their careers, they believe that if they have the intelligence, then they have it. It's not something that they have to keep trying for. Where men in the study, because of the messaging that the parents gave them, the messaging was, you can do better, you're capable, go back, do it again. And they are trained, or they're showed how to face these challenges. And so when you come, women believe, they go through life, most women believe they either have it or they don't have it. And men say, I hit a challenge, get out of my way, I can do it, I'll try again, and they keep going. And that seems to be some distinguishing factors that you see play out later in life between men and women. They pick career fields that they know that they've got it, and they've got comfort, and they've got the capability to excel.
Thank you. And I know we're over time.
Way over time.
But I wanted to point, because I think a number of you have raised it, and I hope we look into this further, how a number of you have identified that the economic value of having more women in senior positions is very important. Like you had mentioned, the companies that go bankrupt when they do practice discrimination. Getting that information out and having more information out there, I think, would be very helpful for educating the public as well as women.
And I do want to say, I've been fighting gender generalizations my whole life, so I am going to come back to this issue. It sort of makes my skin crawl a little bit when we start talking about how all women are this way and all men are that way. So I'll just hold that thought till the second round and hand it over to Ms. Black from Tennessee for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman McSally, and thank you so much for bringing us all together and actually looking at a subject matter which really needs to happen the way you're doing it, and that is getting the true facts. Because so many times I hear generalities said, and they're not always correct. So it's great to have the panel here and to begin this discussion. I'm looking forward to many more of these and continuing to dig into how we can make sure that we're giving families what they need. And I think my young colleague, Ms. Stefanik, talked about how the millennials want more of that partnership. They want more of that time together. And we do hear women say the number one thing they value the most is time. So I want to turn to you, Ms. Bachia, because you, in your written statement, mentioned about mandatory pay leave policies that do more harm than good because they encourage statistical discrimination. How can a paid leave program be designed to mitigate these unintended consequences?
First of all, it must be gender neutral, so it shouldn't be only based on taking time off for taking care of children or elderly parents, where women are more likely to be the caretakers, but it could be a paid time off program for any reason, whether you want to take time off to go golfing or take time off to take care of your grandparents. That shouldn't matter. That makes it more difficult to practice this gender-based discrimination if we have an even playing field. Additionally, instead of a mandatory policy that the government puts in place that employers have to provide, it is better to structure it like a savings account, almost like a health savings account, where the employer can, if they wish, contribute to that fund, and the individual perhaps can also set aside some of their wages pre-tax, maybe to enable them to save more and faster for that purpose of being able to take time off if the employer doesn't provide paid time off. Many individuals do have the ability to take paid time off, whether it be for vacation or other purposes. So unfortunately, that tends to primarily happen for individuals who work full-time and who work in larger companies. Therefore, I think savings accounts can work also for lower-income individuals. And eliminating restrictions that prevent employers from giving employees comp time instead of overtime pay, I think would also be very helpful to women.
Congresswoman, if I might weigh in quickly. Sure. On the issue of paid leave, there's an interesting experiment. Back in 2011, the country of Chile passed mandatory 6-month paid leave for employers with 20 or more employees. And this allowed researchers to look at how women were treated in these firms that were required to offer paid leave versus those that weren't. The firms were just below 20 employees. And what they found is that the women in the firms that were required to offer paid leave paid newly hired women 9 to 20% lower wages than the firms who were not required to pay it. This is consistent with almost all economists believe that the costs of fringe benefits that are paid for ostensibly by the employer are actually paid for by the employee through lower wages. If you were to raise the employer share of the Social Security payroll tax by 1%, over a few years, wages are going to drop by 1% to make up for it. So I think a key insight in all of these things is that if you're offering a benefit to employees, male or female employees, you can expect that those employees are going to pay for it through lower wages or through less valuable other benefits. So then you have to ask yourself the question is there some reason why the labor market isn't already providing them these benefits? You know, many employers already offer different types of benefits and they offer lower wages as a result. So you have to ask, if we're going to require employers to provide these things, is this really what women want, or would they prefer to have higher wages and not have the benefit? And that's the question, putting yourself in the place of the individual.
I think you made some excellent points on benefits and how those benefits are figured into someone's salary when that decision is made. I'm really curious as to whether there's been any studies out there to say how we might be able to flip this and incentivize the employers to do this by maybe some tax provisions. And that would be something I would really like to look at if you all have any information on how we might be able to flip that on its head and incentivize them to do it rather than to put something in that's mandatory and something that may be just seen as another government program where we could really incentivize, and then a woman or a man could make a decision about whether they want to work for that employer depending upon what benefit they provide. And obviously when we look at getting a job, we're looking at all kinds of benefits. How much paid time off do I get? How many vacation days do I get? All of that does figure in about whether you want to work for that employer. Thoughts on that?
Not to return too much, but if you offer an incentive, then if firms are more likely to offer paid leave or maternity leave or whatever you're offering an incentive for. However, to the degree that the cost of that benefit exceeds the incentive you're giving them, the tax credit or whatever, it is still going to be reflected in lower wages for the employee. The core thing is if you want to give a benefit to employees and you don't want any sort of offset against their wages or other benefits, the federal government has to pay for it. If the federal government isn't paying for it, somebody else is paying for it, and most likely that's going to be the employee. So you can shift these decisions by offering incentives, but that doesn't make the cost of the benefit go away, and the cost is usually borne by the employee.
I know that Ms. Bacici is this.
I just wanted to briefly make reference to a study by the Government Accountability Office looking at women's retirement security that identified that women are already self-selecting, and more women now than men have access to retirement accounts at work and other benefits because they tend to work in sectors and industries where they're more likely to receive such benefits: healthcare, nonprofits, government. So we do see a self-selection by women already, which in part means that they're also self-selecting into lower paying occupations and industries because they value the flexibility and other fringe benefits more highly than cash wages.
Thank you. I yield back.
Okay, the chair now recognizes Ms. Elmers from North Carolina for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, and I too would like to thank the chairwoman for this important hearing. And this is very exciting that we're having this discussion, and I'm very much looking forward to continuing this. I would like to continue the discussion on the, the idea of the pay discrepancy. Interestingly enough, I think as we've had this conversation today, the key word that keeps jumping out at me over and over again is flexibility, and that women who are choosing to have children, take care of children at home, and stay at home, they're looking for those more flexible opportunities. Ms. Bacha, you had mentioned Uber and Airbnb, things like that are allowing her to have it all, what we all want. And it is interesting to see the difference between the idea of the younger women and men, millennials, and the way they view things. As for me, I am at the end of the baby boomers, and I am a nurse, and I chose that career because I wanted to have children and have a career and be active, and also a caregiver, which, as you have all pointed out, women are the majority caregivers, whether it's for our children, families, and our parents. So I do want to talk a little bit about that because anecdotally, as I'm having this discussion with my constituents, and it is an issue that women are concerned about, it's the idea that if you are of childbearing age, you are going to take time off, maternity leave, or maybe you have parents, paid family leave. Maybe you have parents that are in need of care. How can we, I know some suggestions have been made, and I would just like to go down the panel of your thoughts. How do we overcome that? If a woman chooses a corporate career, and she comes in at the same time as her male counterpart, but then a year later has a child, stays home for 6 weeks, she's already now behind in that pay scale. And I do like the idea of making and differentiating between whether it's the income or the cash amount versus the flexibility of benefits. But what other things can we do to even that out? I mean, if a woman leaves the workforce for a month and a half or 2 months, she's already behind. How can we fix that?
Well, unless men are going to start having the babies, I don't think we can do much about that. But when you ask females in executive position how they have it all, especially those who have children, what you find is that they tend to have spouses in their lives who take on more of the child care and domestic responsibilities. The simple fact is there are only 24 hours in a day, whether you're a man or woman. So if women want to perform more of the breadwinning role and want to chase their careers, then and also want to have children, they either have to pay for the child care and the domestic responsibilities, or their spouses have to help, and usually it becomes a combination of both. And we are seeing today more and more women who are the primary breadwinners in families. I think we'll see more of that development as women continue to earn more college degrees, also graduate degrees. One thing that we do need to think about too is that we have research from the National Bureau of Economic Research that shows that women still prefer to match up with a male who's higher earning and has higher earnings potential than they do. Statistically, if women are going to be outperforming men in the long run, they will have to be comfortable with the fact that they will be the primary breadwinners, and statistically there just won't be men that are going to earn more than them. So we see these roles changing. Countries that are more egalitarian, like Norway, that have a gender-neutral family leave policies, the men play a much larger role in the household and play a much larger role when it comes to childcare, more likely to take parental leave as well as women.
Great.
There's also a trend in women starting businesses, entrepreneurs. So I think that the statistic right now is 40% of women have started businesses today, which is a significant jump in the last 10 or 15 years of women starting businesses. I think that that is an avenue that women do feel provides them the flexibility in order to balance work and family, and it's a reality.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Unfortunately, with low-income families, 6 weeks off is a luxury that many of them cannot afford. So we have seen Habitat home buyers returning, or Habitat homeowners returning to work 3, 4, 5 days after having a child. So it is, again, a luxury. So we see our families when they have 2 working adults in the house, or a working single mother leaving newborns 2, 3 weeks old with neighbors or in childcare or with another Habitat family, and returning back to their low-wage jobs because they don't have paid family leave.
Awful. And I know we're over time. I would like to hear what Mr.
One advantage of moving away from sort of the myth that the gender pay difference are driven by discrimination is that it causes us to focus on what, in fact, is driving these differences. And types of work are important. If you have a job that's what you call piecework, where you do a unit of work and then you go on to another unit, those jobs tend to be fairly equal in pay between men and women. The best example is pharmacists. Pharmacists have almost no pay gap between men and women because you can come in, fill the prescription. If you leave an hour later, it's not a problem. Now think of something like 2 lawyers who are going to prepare a case against each other. The lawyer who is able to put in 100 hours a week, and I worked at a law firm and some of them do that, is more likely to win than the one who put in 40 hours a week. Those sorts of winner-take-all, increasing returns to scale kinds of jobs are not going to be very rewarding financially for somebody who is not willing to be the winner takes all. So it's thinking about the types of work and how those drive different types of compensation.
Thank you so much.
Okay, great. The chair now recognizes Mr. Dole from Illinois for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank you for holding this hearing, and I want to thank our witnesses for coming to talk about a topic that I think is critically important. So as the father of 2 daughters and the brother of 3 sisters and a strong mother, I certainly recognize that, and have always been taught that if you want to get something done, give it to a busy woman. They're able to multitask far better, I think, than men can. But we do recognize that this is a problem out there, and so the question is what can we be doing to remedy it, and is it something that the federal government should be jumping in terms of legislation or trying to educate folks back in the private sector? One of the things that I've done back home is start a Young Women's Leadership Academy. And I think that's important in terms of trying to empower young women, expose them to various different fields that are out there, so they get different experiences and potentially go down a different career path. But the one thing that I am hearing over and over again is about entrepreneurship. More and more women, as you have all mentioned, are going into starting their own businesses, which I think also can go into this idea about the economic value of women in senior positions. Can you talk more about that impact? I know my colleague, Ms. Comstock, was talking about the value of having women in senior leadership roles in organizations and the economic value that provides.
Absolutely. When there's a balance of women in decision-making roles, whether it be strategic or even, in a line role in an organization, or of course sitting at the board level, it's the diversity of thought that allows for a greater outcome, and that diversity of thought, and greater outcome drives higher profitability, higher revenue, better return on equity, and there's lots of research pointing that engagement goes up and turnover goes down. So those kind of bottom line statistics that are hard, that are tangible, we've never had that information at our fingertips before. And from my research, McKinsey is, an organization, a research organization that's been following women's progress in the workplace for the last 10+ years, and they continue to put out these studies, and the studies are now what's making corporate America take a step back, the larger ones, and say we need to do something about this because it's making a difference. There's also a large investment firm that everybody knows well, and they've specifically put out funds that are segmented towards women, a balance of women at the top, and they've put them out there as investment vehicles, identifying diversity of women at the top, and they're doing quite well.
Great. Ms. Boccia, you had actually, in your testimony, talked about instead of doubling down on harmful policies, Congress should instead be focusing and taking a look at policies that hinder women's economic opportunity and remove them. Give me your take on the biggest one that we ought to be looking at and trying to remove that barrier that prevents women from succeeding.
It depends on the woman you look at. I think, though, that the fact that employers are not able to have frank conversations with their employees because asking them what their plans are for family formation is against the law. They're not allowed to ask. Are we protecting women, or are we encouraging statistical discrimination? Because the simple fact is that women are more likely to take time out of the workforce, and if employers are not able to have this conversation and the woman isn't volunteering it, then we likely will see statistical discrimination, and it gets perpetuated by government policies like the Family Medical Leave Act. Earlier in my oral testimony, I cited a study from Cornell from 2015 that shows that women were less likely to get promoted after that passed. The other thing I wanted to say is that I commend the committee for laying out the facts on these issues. I find it very discouraging that the Obama administration and other organizations continue to perpetuate the popular myth of the gender wage gap. Many women I interact with on a regular basis believe it. Language is important. It has powerful effects. And when women believe that they're being mistreated in the workplace, unfortunately, too many of them resign to the fact and wait for somebody to come rescue them instead of standing up for themselves and fighting for their rights.
I have one more question. It's really revolving around education. And we have 18% of women are being educated in engineering, 12% actually in the workplace. Are there things, as we look at STEM education going forward and how critically important it is, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, that we can do to encourage more women to be going into field of study in terms of education, building blocks for everything that we want to do, so that ultimately as people retire, we have obviously a huge discrepancy as those that are retiring into, in essence, poverty. We want to be able to deal with that. So anybody want to talk real quickly on education?
Women and men, or girls and boys, tend to have fairly similar test scores on SATs and things like that. You do find when you look at the distribution of college majors that you have many more men going into engineering or business or finance or economics, more women focusing on elementary education or sociology, which tend to be lower paid majors or lower paid occupations later in life. Many colleges are making overt attempts to recruit more women into the STEM fields, knowing that they're capable of doing it. At the same time, though, at some point you have to, economists believe in what's called revealed preferences, which is a fancy way of saying what people choose to do is a reflection of what they want to do. And so we want to be careful about sort of condemning people for making choices that is what they want to do, or sort of coercing people into doing it. But I do think the old version of affirmative action, of outreach and trying to recruit women into fields that they might feel intimidated by, I think that makes sense. And many colleges are trying to do that.
Thank you. My time's expired, Madam Chair.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Walberg from Michigan, who is also the subcommittee chair of Workforce Protections on the Education and Workforce Committee here.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, for this very interesting, stimulating, and I happen to be a guy who thought the 60s was a wonderful time period. Age of Aquarius and a lot of great music, so I won't take a back seat on that, and being at the beginning stages of the baby boomers, hey, that's good too. But this is a subject we ought to be talking about, and it is different from certainly the experience that I had back in the 50s and 60s, and then going into the workplace in the 70s. But it's a discussion we ought to talk about because it's real. I just came from a hearing in oversight dealing with sex discrimination and gender discrimination at the National Park Service. And these are things we have to address. Let me ask, and generally to the whole group, if you care to answer that, what role does the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission play in reducing gender wage gap? And would extending the statute of limitations to sue or filing a suit with the courts and EEOC concurrently measurably reduce the gender pay gap? And chairing the subcommittee that deals with the EEOC, this is an important answer that you're going to give to me here.
My gut is it would not, extending the statute of limitations may or may not be a good policy. I mean, I've read, pros and cons on it, but at the end of the day, statistically, it seems that most of gender pay differences are driven by factors that are not pay discrimination by employers. So, even if the remaining residual were entirely discrimination-driven, which I doubt it is, eliminating it wouldn't lead to much of a shrinking in the pay difference between men and women. So again, it's trying to think of the gain versus the loss. The gain is you might have a small shrinkage of the pay gap between men and women. The loss, though, could be increased litigation, making women less attractive to employers as employees because they carry that litigation risk. So
almost stigmatizing still further.
Sure. So you want there are pros and cons in all of this, and you want to weigh the potential benefits versus the losses. What the research on the pay gap shows, though, is that because of most of pay differences are driven by factors that are rationally related to pay, the type of college degree you had or the number of years of work experience you have, the window for shrinking the pay gap by addressing discrimination is relatively small. So it gives you an idea of what the potential gains might be.
I would say that women in poverty live in such a shroud of fear that all of the legislation in the world would not protect them from the type of discrimination that would fall under that umbrella. They're living in such fear of losing the job or the means to have tomorrow's meal that they would never approach taking action on a discrimination claim, regardless of...
So a Lilly Ledbetter situation for them is meaningless.
Correct.
What you're saying.
I mean, things would have to move to a broad scale, class action scale in order for any of them to take a move, to make a move. The women that we serve live in such daily fear of even asking for a day off. They're living on such low margins they're in survival mode that it really would not make a difference, unfortunately.
Okay, I appreciate that. Let me turn to another challenge and have legislation that I've been working on this, but would like your comments, specifically dealing with pregnancy and pregnancy of women in the workplace, not subsequent to delivering, but what challenges are evident in the workplace today for the pregnant woman that we can and should address. And I, for one, don't want to take over the responsibility of pregnancy. and I think most of my males would agree with me on that. And yet, we ought to encourage and laud that wonderful function in life of design. How do we get better in dealing with the pregnant woman in the workplace?
I can speak as an employer with 3 pregnant employees right now, 3 of 43.
What's in the water?
And, we're putting spaces, we are actually modifying our building and putting spaces in place to create comfort areas and to make schedules to provide comfort for them and to make telecommuting possible. We're deploying the best technology we can and adapting our building, our work schedules, and our environment to best meet their needs. And I think as long as we have technology available to us and we can do it in a cost-effective way that doesn't greatly affect the people that we serve through our organization, that there are accommodations that we need to make as an employer.
Is there any stigma to treating it in a way that gives special, for a period of time of the pregnancy, and maybe even a period of time during the ending of the pregnancy, special ability or disability concerns for women?
Well, sir, I would say if someone had a sprained ankle or a bad back on the construction site, we would treat that with the same due diligence and care that we would the pregnancy. And so as long as we are applying the adaptations in the same way that we would any other medical condition, I think we're safe.
Okay. Thank you.
I do think there is a key difference, however, if somebody has a sprained ankle or breaks something on the job. We cannot predict that effectively, but we can make assumptions about women of childbearing age, the likelihood that they will have children and be pregnant, and to the extent that we mandate particular accommodations that employers may not otherwise make, we may discourage the hiring of women who are pregnant or who may become pregnant if the employer looks at that as a potential cost.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, the chair now recognizes Mr. Donovan from New York for 5 minutes.
I apologize. I had someplace else I was at as well, so I came in late, and you probably answered so many questions that I have to get educated on. Before I came to Congress, I was a district attorney for 20 years. I paid my female assistant district attorneys the same as I paid my males. I gave males child care leave when their spouse had a baby, the same as I gave females who had babies child care leave. So I was ignorant, naive about all this till I came to Congress. And some of my thoughts, what the gentleman said before about chosen professions, I often wondered, not so much that maybe women were attracted to elementary education as a career, but was that suitable to the fact that you're going to have a baby? And maybe that wasn't your first career choice, but I couldn't work. I worked in one of those firms as well for 100 hours a week. That maybe the choice was made now because it was my ambition to be an elementary school teacher, and I think the highest thing of elementary school teachers, but that's going to suit my needs. So I had to make career choices based on my biology or my fact that I wanted to have children. And I'll publicly say this, last year at 58 years old, I had my first baby. Actually, my wife had the first baby, and she reminds me of that every day, and I always call her my first baby, and she calls her my last baby. But we had to make accommodations. My baby, though, hit the birth lottery. She was born into Dan and Serena's life, and Serena's employee. She's a Wall Street attorney. Her firm made accommodations for her. She works 1 day a week from home to help with our child care. So we're very fortunate. The folks that you were talking about aren't as fortunate as we are. So just briefly, just to educate me a little bit, is mindset changing the answer to this? Do we have to legislate or prohibit people from, employers from bad behavior? Help me understand this a little bit, and I know it's going to be hard and you're not going to be able to hit everything, but in a short minute, because I think the chairwoman is going to hold more of these events so we could really understand the issue and then really come up with solutions. So maybe just help me a little bit, maybe each of you for 30 seconds, a minute, just tell me what your thoughts are to help me.
Can you clarify the question, please?
I'm trying to understand the issue.
Okay.
Again, like I said, I was an employer for 20 years. I gave equal accommodations to men and women who had a newborn in their lives. I paid people the same amount of money regardless of their gender. So I'm trying to understand it. And I was saying when the gentleman was talking about pharmacists, it doesn't matter if you're a male or female, because you're doing piecemeal work, everybody gets paid, $20 an hour. But it's when you go into these other careers where we see the disparity. And maybe some of those choices a woman makes isn't because it's her ambition to go into a certain field, but it's easier because of the challenges that she may face. And I'm not saying a baby's challenge, because I tell people Congress is good, my baby's great. So maybe you could just help me a little bit, my time's running out, just to understand the core issue, and then whether or not we have to prohibit employers from bad behavior through legislation. We have to change people's mindsets about how we should treat women in the workplace. Just a little bit, give me something in my short period of time so I have that to carry on to the next hearing that the chairwoman is going to conduct.
My gut is that you'll see businesses acting more or less rationally. You spoke of your wife who's a Wall Street lawyer, and they've been very generous interests in terms of accommodating her when she had a child. And the reason for that is she has skills and she has experience that if they were to fire her for getting pregnant, they lose all of that. Similarly, Representative McNally, you were a pilot. If you become pregnant and say, I have to stop piloting for a little while, they're not going to say, okay, bye-bye, let's go put another $1 million into training a pilot. They're saying, how do we keep that experience on the job or employed by us, because it's something that's built up over time. My guess is, though, that if you're in a job where there is not a lot of human capital in the employees, where experience and skill don't matter as much, the employers are not going to care as much about it. Now, in those cases, you might want to do incentives or education or whatever, but by and large, the employers understand their interests and they're acting in those interests. So it's really recognizing there's certain realities here, and that we, government is not in the business of telling people you can't have it all, but the reality is that you can't have it all. And so people are going to make compromises, and those compromises are going to affect their careers in some ways.
I would add that the cost of housing and people's ability to afford that cost of housing, or people's wages, are out of balance. And that is to an extreme for low-skilled, low-paid women. And that low-waged women are at an extremely high risk for not being able to find adequate, safe housing in this country, almost to the point of an epidemic, where we have low-income women and children at risk for homelessness and homeless and living in inadequate housing from one shore to another.
I think looking at zoning laws in that respect may be one area of promise to remove barriers that keep low-income individuals out of more attractive neighborhoods because of restrictions put in place in terms of housing. It used to be much more common to have an English basement and rent that out for a lot less than the main house, or to have an apartment over a garage. To the extent that communities are preventing that, allowing people to live amongst each other by allowing that type of housing, I think we are creating barriers for low-income individuals to live in the communities where their work is located as well.
All right, great. I'm going to recognize myself for a second round, since we have a captive audience here, and I appreciate all the expertise on the panel. The first thing I want to follow up on, I mentioned it kind of in the middle of the questioning, is I'm a little resistant to broad gender generalizations. All women are this way, all men are this way. I've been personally fighting against them my whole life. I feel part of my life calling is to create cognitive dissonance in people against those generalizations. The first is to be a female warrior, and the second is to be a Republican feminist. My new calling. And these types of arguments, quite frankly, were used to continue to keep women out of things like what I did with my life, being a fighter pilot. We listened to people testify before Congress about how women don't have the capability to be warriors, and we couldn't for a variety of different reasons, and lumping us all in together. America is about treating people as individuals and giving every individual, men and women, the opportunity to meet their full potential. And that's really what the vision is here, to look at each person as an individual and to make sure that they are able to have the same opportunity as anybody else to achieve their full dreams and their full potential. The reality is biases still exist. They've been mentioned up here and throughout the course of this hearing. They're very, very real. And we've talked a little bit about them, where women going in to negotiate a higher salary is even viewed differently by the male employer, about being a little too pushy, where the man is seen as being assertive. Again, we've got the different labels about strong women being assertive in leadership and how they are seen back and forth. I used to go visit schools as a fighter pilot, and oftentimes the principal or the teacher would say, a fighter pilot is coming tomorrow, and all the little boys would get excited. And then I would walk in the door and all the little girls would get excited. I mean, these biases exist. They would be confused for a moment, and then the girls would be like, yeah! These biases exist, and they exist at a very early age. And I think, again, these are complex issues, and I appreciate all of your perspectives on this, but they're still very real. And when I'm listening to women in my community that I represent implement the biases, the double standards, and the flat-out discrimination is still very real. And by the way, some of us on this panel have experienced that ourselves. And so I just want to make sure that we, as this working group, are acknowledging, as we're wrapping up here, that there are biases out there. There is discrimination out there. And when you're now looking at it mathematically, which is more witnesses on the end here, you're looking at sort of the studies. Yes, from closing that wage gap to about 95% can be accounted by from the things that have been mentioned in this hearing, going into lower paying career fields, looking for more flexibility, moving in and out of the workforce, all those types of things. But there is still the 95 to $1, and you can't measure it completely, but there is still blatant discriminations out there. Somebody who's very close to me, daughter just entered the financial services industry, straight out of college, sitting around, finds out that she's getting paid way less than the guys, same degrees, same everything next to her. And as they're going in for their job performances, they're being told how to be mentored and to, meet the next level, and she's being told that she needs to smile more and bring in more cookies and things. So these things are real, okay? This is not just the tyranny of the anecdote. There are many women across the spectrum, girls and women, that are still experiencing these things. So I want to make sure, I want to give the opportunity, because I don't want the wrong message to come out of this panel. You all agree that biases and discrimination still exist, and flat-out discrimination still exists out there. Is that true? Can we just get a yes?
Yes.
Everybody? Yes. Okay, thank you. Again, I don't want the wrong message to be coming out of this. As we're trying to measure, it's difficult to measure.
It is.
It seems like it's somewhere in that 95 cents of the dollar, but it's still very real. And there's a lot of women, by the way, who are not going to the EEOC. Yep. They may be trying to just be in their own trench and fight it for themselves, but then they don't do anything else about it because they don't feel like they can, or they don't even know about it. Another thing I want to mention, Mr. Biggs, you talked about the pharmacists, but when I met with groups in my community, they pointed out to me that the real reason the pay gap is closed with pharmacists is because men wages are going down, not because women's are going up. And so we've got to make sure that we're actually looking at what's going on in each of those career fields. And I don't know if you have a comment on that, but that was pointed out to me by some of the experts in my community that I met with.
But men's wages have gone down.
In pharmacy.
Yeah, they've gone down.
As pharmacists.
In general. Well, with pharmacy, you have two things going on that play into gender wage gap. One is the piecework issue I mentioned before. The second issue is you don't see very many independent drugstores anymore. You see chains. What that means is there's fewer of the pharmacists are actually owners, which reduces the time demands on the owner, which does make it a more female-friendly job. But it also means that overall wage levels are going to drop because you're an employee and no longer the owner.
Got it.
So
Okay.
I suspect that drives some of it.
Got it. So I have a couple more topics I just want to bring up with everybody. The first is, it was touched on briefly, but nobody has really focused on childcare. So the barriers that I hear from, whether it's women in poverty, when we talked in Tucson, if you have a woman who's in poverty and is trying to still care for her children, single moms, more likely, access to childcare gets them, lack of access to childcare gets them stuck in this vicious cycle where they can't get a job because they can't afford childcare, and so they're stuck. And then in the sort of the middle class realm, whether you're a single parent or in many cases dual parent earners, where they start looking at the cost of childcare and then the wages they're going to actually earn. And if you're taking 75% of your wages to pay for childcare, then you actually choose, it doesn't seem economically beneficial to you because it's too expensive. So you may choose to stay home, but you really didn't want to stay home. You actually wanted to contribute to the workforce. And so this is a barrier that I've heard from really across the economic spectrum. So what are your thoughts on that? I want to really hear from the whole panel about the access to affordable childcare and what we can be doing it, because it's the elephant in the room.
I'll start on that. Right now we're holding a house for a home buyer. She qualifies for the house, everything except the child care. And it's in my statement, I didn't get to it speaking, but the child care equals more than a mortgage payment for her home.
Me too.
Yeah, and it's a serious problem, and that's just after school. It's a kindergartner, and there's only half-day child care, half-day kindergarten, and the after-school is more than the child care for after school is more than a mortgage payment. So until we find some sort of equity, and she's lucky she was on a waiting list to get child care at all. Brenda, the story that I told, she has to flex her hours, go in at 1:45 in the morning so she can be home in time to get the kids after school because she has 2 elementary-aged children. Otherwise, she can't afford the house because of childcare. It's the most critical issue that we're hearing. The reason people are flexing and taking the only job that they can find that allows them to be home during the hours that their children are at home. We see a lot of people taking CNA jobs, caregiver jobs in people's homes, working shift work. You mentioned Uber. We have quite a few home buyers that work Uber because they can set their own hours, but that's not, it's lucrative enough for them to pay a mortgage on an affordable home, but not enough money really to survive in a market rate economy.
Anyone else?
What are the reasons that childcare is so expensive? That's something that policymakers could look at to the extent that it's regulatory reasons on their state or federal level. Those could be eliminated. Who are childcare workers? If they are primarily immigrants, possibly relaxing immigration restrictions could bring in more childcare workers. The other thing to keep in mind, though, is that if you have more childcare laborers, they likely will be paid lower wages, so then lawmakers may have concerns in that direction if these people are not being properly compensated, but you have to find a balance there. You're either paying a lot for childcare or you're paying less for childcare, but that also means that the person providing the childcare isn't getting paid as much.
I agree strongly with Ms. Bakke. You want to ask, why does child care cost so much, not how can the federal government pay for child care? And those are often sort of conflated issues, but if you think about, we have the same sort of questions. How do we pay for college education? And you have, Pell Grants and other federal programs to assist with education, and yet college costs have kept going up. And what research has found is that the colleges poach some of that money off for themselves. So you're contributing to the problem rather than solving it. I just saw a research paper within the past week that looked at the same issue on subsidies for child care. And when you subsidize child care, the child care providers raise their prices because they want to grab some of that subsidy. So I think the key thing is trying to say, why is it so expensive? And look, the key issue is you want to have somebody who is going to be raising your child who is, as good at raising your child as you are. That doesn't come cheap. I mean, it is not putting your dog in a kennel. It's a skilled profession, and if you care about your child, you're going to pay well for that. So again, it comes down to certain inherent trade-offs that are not going to be easily solved.
Well, I would maintain that we are subsidizing both child care and elder care. And studies have shown that elderly who have an occupied profession age slower. So it seems like we're subsidizing two things that could put those two occupations together. Some creative thinking may put the children with the nanas and come out with a creative solution. Mm-hmm. In some families, we have the grandmother going to a daycare program for custodial care and the child going to a child care program for custodial care.
Two different
both
places.
In low-income families, when we could be having the child and the grandparent go together and we keeping families together and paying one subsidy. So I think it's just looking at the family as a whole unit rather than piecing it out to different agencies. And so if we looked at that as a creative solution and started looking at families as families and not looking at families as federal programs, no offense to anyone in the room, we may be able to solve some solutions, stop looking at the human beings as statistics and start looking at them as families.
And one of the things when we talked in Tucson was the House GOP has the Better Way, the agenda, better.gop, and one of them is reforming poverty programs, which the intent is to make them more tailorable and not top-down, one-size-fits-all bureaucrats driving it from Washington, D.C., but what fits for the programs we have, what fits for the individual, that doesn't, have multiple bureaucracies dealing with it, that isn't confusing for the individual that needs it, but then also incentivizes them getting out of poverty, not being trapped in poverty. And so I think a lot of those solutions, but the grandparents with the children, that's an interesting one. Do you have anything to add?
I do. I actually interviewed a business owner of a child care chain facility in multiple towns, And I did question the rising cost of childcare and how that holds women back from entering the workforce. And as the owner of the childcare facilities, his biggest concern was that his approach to market pricing is not to be the lowest in town and certainly not to be the highest in town, but his expenses are being, and costs are being significantly affected by the regulatory agency and focusing on quantity of childcare workers for things that may or may not be related to safety and quality. And then also the other things he talked about that significantly impact his cost was the rising cost of minimum wage. These are minimum wage workers, and the cost of that significant increase for him,
it's passed on.
It gets passed on. Those increases get passed on. And the other thing that he said, there's one other thing that he said, the Affordable Care Act gets passed on. Those are the three things. He's not looking to increase his prices, but he has no choice.
Great. I know I said we weren't going to jump ahead to solutions, but some of the things that have been talked about, and I think there is some legislation sitting in Congress related to, we haven't updated the child care tax credit in a number of years, increasing that, again, turning these things on their head. Instead of federal regulations top down, turning it around and trying to incentivize. Also, just providing a little more flexibility, because right now I think what I've heard is the regulations and the incentives favor a established child care facility versus more innovative family members or neighbors of others, which may even be healthier for the child. I think, again, we got to look at more flexibility, innovative ways to incentivize and bring that cost down, as opposed, to more government mandates. So the next topic I want to talk about is we talked a little bit about a potential generational difference between young women that are coming out of school right now, and they're actually, being a positive pay gap, although some of them are not yet at childbearing age and are more likely to be delaying having children. Yet what I've seen and what I've heard around my district is it's a lot of women in their 40s and 50s and 60s that were put into these went into these lower paying career fields early on, didn't feel like they had the opportunities, but now maybe the children are out of the house, and so there is an opportunity for them to maybe move into a different career field that actually is one of the higher paying jobs. Are there any perspectives you have about, retraining programs and things that actually hit that middle-aged woman right now? If she stays on that same graph, is going to be still continuing to earn, less than her male counterpart, and therefore more likely to be in poverty in her senior years. Like, what can we be doing in that middle-aged area?
Well, this applies throughout the age range, but one of the problems Ms. Bacchia raised was that employers are sometimes reluctant to invest in female employees in terms of experience and skills and training, because they're not sure if that investment is going to pay off if the woman leaves the job or leaves the workforce when she has children. I think incentives for women to get training themselves helps get around that problem. The woman can know whether she is going to use this training or not, or she has certainly a better idea than the employer will. And that's so, you have a legitimate market failure in the sense the employers don't know which women will drop out, which won't, and so they underinvest in all of them. I think something like that at all ages can help women get around that problem and get the skills that they need to move ahead.
Anything else? Anything else to share? I mean, T, you see women that are stuck in that place now that are low-income women, right? So
we do, and the thing that we're working with the women that we serve is once they get to that place where their mortgage is just about paid off, we see them through the process of buying the house. We're working with them from the minute they open our doors. So we see a lot of them investing in JobPath and other nonprofits that we're connecting them with through the home ownership. So from the minute they're walking in the door, we're working on them, working with them to improve their income. Through the home ownership, they're building family wealth. What we're doing as they come towards the end of their mortgage is working with them on money management, and we're working with other organizations, and we've engaged a series of investment bankers to give them free advice. It seems like in this country you have to have money to learn how to make money. So we are connecting our home buyers towards the end of their mortgage with money managers that would manage wealth assets for foundations or wealthy individuals, and they're working on savings plans and retirement plans with these women to help them in a small way build wealth for themselves. So it's money management and education on investments and retirement plans. That's one way that we're helping them do that. But we work with them on career advancement, and we're partnering with employers. Tucson Medical Center is one that we have 14 of our homeowners work at Tucson Medical Center, and they work on career investment with their home buyers. They give them time for continuing education and help them with career advancement as part of homeownership.
Great, thanks. Okay, my last topic, and then I'll let you go, is visiting with women entrepreneurs, which is where we met, Ms. Tucson. I'm hearing from many of them that access to capital is where they are feeling that they're experiencing some bias. So we talked about some solutions. Women can maybe have more flexibility or sort of be in the driving seat of their lives if they're no longer an employee but choose to kind of open up their own business, but then they're feeling that they're biased and not able to get the capital they need in order to start or grow their business. Can I just have some perspectives from you and then anyone else on the panel on that issue and what can be done about it?
Yes, yes, and yes. Interestingly enough, earlier in my career, I was in the space of investment banking, and it is a challenge for women to be taken seriously by the venture capital firms and the foundations, as a viable investment. And I think times are changing, but they're changing slowly in women's favor, and especially now as this research comes out that women are more than capable of managing their P&L and creating economic, being economic sustainability. Their eyes are opening to it. I think that there is this unconscious bias going on for women, and the way that women are actually having to start their businesses is through borrowing money from family or second mortgages, and it's taking them longer to get to where the time frame of which it takes for them to get, profitability is a longer time frame, but it happens. And these businesses, from the research that I've read, tend to be stronger businesses.
Great, thank you.
Sustainable.
All right, I didn't realize that my colleague here had more questions. Thanks for your patience, but I'll hand it over to Mr. Donovan.
Just one question. Again, I'm understanding the issue. You've educated me greatly, and I could vouch that childcare is more expensive than your mortgage. And some of the folks that you represent, I don't know how they afford it, because I get a congressman's salary. And it's difficult for us when you think about how much we pay. Let me just ask you, two ways that I was explained that this disparity of salaries. One, many times for the same job, a woman will start a lower wage than a man starts. So that then when everyone gets a 10% raise, you're getting a 10% raise on less money. So that disparity starts to grow. And if you have enough years, that disparity becomes large. Is that one of the reasons? The other reason I was told is that when we both start a career path together, and you decide to stay home for 3 years until your baby goes to school, you've been absent in that while I've still been working. So now, as an associate in a law firm, I'm a 6th-year associate, or 7th year, and you're a 4th year, even though we started at the same time, and that causes a disparity. What people are telling me, are those two things correct?
Absolutely. Yep.
Great, thank you.
All right, wonderful. Thanks for your patience. I really want to thank the witnesses for your very valuable testimony. This is the beginning of a conversation. I really appreciate all the members and their interest in this working group. I think I can speak for everybody that this was a very valuable start to our working group, and this will be continued, and I appreciate all of your time and effort, and if we have any follow-up questions, we'll be in touch. So thank you so much for your time, and the hearing is now adjourned.
That you were here.
Oh, you had a very interesting perspective. I liked it.
Yeah, well, I loved that you had all the details to fill it in. And I like that you went first.
Yes.